Chapter 3. Silent Bonds. The morning mist clung to the rice paddies like a blessing, softening the edges of Barrio San Isidro and muffling the sounds of early labor. Nando found his father already in the fields, moving slowly behind Cal as they worked the western section that bordered the irrigation channel. The carabao's massive hooves made deep impressions in the mud, and water seeped into each footprint like small mirrors reflecting the gray sky. "Father," Nando called softly as he approached, not wanting to startle either man or beast. Mang Elias straightened carefully, one hand pressed to his lower back. "You're early, son. Clara's kitchen isn't even smoking yet." "I couldn't sleep," Nando admitted, taking the plow handles from his father's weathered hands. "Let me take over the plowing, rest for a while." For a moment, it seemed his father might protest, but then Mang Elias stepped aside with a small nod. "The right side of the field is weak there. We need to fix the water." They worked in comfortable silence, the rhythm as familiar as breathing. Nando guided the plow while Mang Elias walked alongside, occasionally pointing out rocks that needed removing or channels that required deepening. Their communication needed few words, a gesture toward a section that needed extra attention, a nod of approval when a furrow ran straight and true. Cal responded to Nando's voice commands as readily as he did to his master's. The great beast had known both men since he was a young calf, and the trust between them ran deep. When Nando clicked his tongue twice, Cal would pause. A gentle "go ahead, Cal" would start him moving again. The animal's patient strength made the backbreaking work possible, his steady pace allowing both men to maintain their labor without exhaustion. As the sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist, they moved from plowing to the delicate work of adjusting the water levels between paddies. This required understanding built over years, knowing exactly how much water each section needed, when to open the bamboo gates that controlled the flow, how to ensure that water reached every corner without flooding the seedlings. As they worked to clear a blocked irrigation channel, a sudden coughing fit seized Mang Elias. He doubled over, one hand pressed to his chest, his body shaking with the force of it. The attack was worse than usual, harsh, rattling sounds that seemed to come from deep within his lungs. "Father!" Nando dropped his tools and moved quickly to his father's side. Mang Elias waved him away, but not before Nando caught sight of the bright red stain on the cloth his father pressed to his mouth. When the fit finally passed, the older man looked pale and shaken, his breathing labored. "Sit down first, father," Nando insisted, guiding him toward a raised section of the dike. "It's getting too hot." "I'm all right," Mang Elias managed, but his voice was hoarse and weak. "Just dust from the water." But they both knew it was more than dust from the irrigation work. Nando watched with growing alarm as his father struggled to catch his breath, noting how much thinner he had become in recent weeks. "Your father taught me that," Mang Elias said once he had recovered enough to speak normally, watching as Nando adjusted a channel with the same careful precision he himself had learned 40 years earlier. And his father before him. The mention of Nando's grandfather, a man he had barely known, created a moment of connection. Here, in these muddy fields, generations of their family had performed this same dance with water and earth. By midday, when the heat became too intense for heavy labor, they sought shelter in the small bamboo shed that housed their tools and water containers. The structure provided blessed coolness after the blazing sun of the fields, and Clara had sent lunch wrapped in banana leaves, rice with bits of dried fish and vegetables from her garden. They sat on upturned baskets, eating in companionable silence, listening to the sounds of other farmers across the paddies calling to their own carabaos. "I saw Ramon last night," Mang Elias said suddenly, his voice carrying the hopeful tone it always took when he spoke of his firstborn. "He said he'll visit here this afternoon." Nando kept his expression neutral, though his jaw tightened slightly. "I hope so, father." "He's supposedly bringing tobacco from town, the good kind." Mang Elias smiled, a rare expression of genuine pleasure. "He always remembers the things I like." When he remembers at all, Nando thought, but said nothing. Instead, he watched as his father's face took on the distant look it always wore when thinking of Ramon, a mixture of pride and worry that Nando had never seen directed at himself. After lunch, while the heat still pressed down on the barrio, they made their way to the Carabao shed to check on Cal and tend to the equipment. The shed was a simple structure of bamboo and nipa, but it provided blessed coolness after the blazing sun of the fields. Kaloy seemed to sense the change in his master. The great beast had begun moving more slowly in the fields, as if understanding that Mang Elias could no longer keep the demanding pace of previous seasons. Several times that morning, Nando had seen the Carabao pause without being asked, turning his massive head to check on the older man who walked unsteadily behind the plow. Now, in the shed, Kaloy lowered his great head and gently nuzzled Mang Elias' shoulder, a gesture of comfort that the animal had never shown before. Kaloy stood patiently as they examined his hooves and checked the condition of his harness. When Nando suggested they might need to repair the wooden plow, noting a loose joint in the handle, Mang Elias' response was sharp and immediate. "There's nothing wrong with that plow," he said firmly. "My father used it before me." Nando nodded, recognizing the defensive tone that always appeared when his father felt his judgment was being questioned. "Yes, father, it's still good." In the dim light of the shed, as they worked side by side oiling the plow handles and checking the iron tip for damage, Nando felt closer to his father than he had in years. This was their natural element, not conversation, but shared labor. Not words, but the quiet understanding that came from working toward the same goal. "We only worked 2 hours this morning," Nando observed as they organized their tools. "Before, you were with me in the fields all day." Mang Elias' hands paused in their work. It was true, his endurance was failing. Tasks that had once been routine now left him exhausted. Even Kaloy was doing most of the heavy pulling while Nando guided the plow. "I've gotten old," he admitted grudgingly, "but I'm not dead yet." The words carried a defensive edge, but underneath, Nando heard something else, a quiet acknowledgement that time was running short. Just then, footsteps approached the shed, and Clara appeared in the doorway carrying a clay cup. "I thought you might be thirsty," she said, offering the cool water to Mang Elias first. "Thank you, child," Mang Elias said, accepting the cup gratefully. After drinking deeply, he handed it to Nando before looking back at Clara. "Your wife is thoughtful, like your mother was." Clara's eyes widened slightly at the unexpected mention, and Nando felt his heart quicken. His father rarely spoke of Rosa, never mentioned her without prompting. "Thank you, father," Clara said softly, then began to withdraw from the shed. "You're good with Kaloy," Mang Elias observed, watching as Nando gently examined a small cut on the Carabao's leg. "He trusts you." "We've been together for a long time," Nando replied, applying a simple poultice of mud and crushed leaves to the minor wound. 8 years now, since you brought him here as a calf." "Has it been that long already?" Mang Elias looked thoughtful. "You were 19 then, just married to Clara." "I remember the day clearly. Ramon said we should wait, see if the calf would be strong enough for field work." Nando smiled at the memory. "But I could tell right away he had a good temperament. You said I had an eye for animals." For a moment, something softened in Mang Elias' weathered face. "Yes, I remember now. You told me, 'I'm not afraid, father. Callie is kind.' You were right." The rare sharing of memory created a warmth between them that Nando treasured. Encouraged by this opening and his father's earlier mention of Rosa, he ventured carefully into more dangerous territory. "My mother," Nando began hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Rosa, do you still think of her often, father?" The change in Mang Elias was immediate and devastating. His face closed off like a shutter slamming shut, the brief warmth disappearing completely. He straightened abruptly, his movements suddenly tense and guarded. "There's still a lot of work," he said, his voice suddenly cold and distant. "We need to finish before the sun sets." The moment of connection vanished as if it had never existed. Nando felt the familiar ache settle in his chest, the hollow space where his father's recognition should have been. Every time he tried to reach toward Rosa's memory, every time he sought to understand the woman who had given her life for his, his father retreated behind that impenetrable wall. As they finished their work in the oppressive quiet that followed, Nando felt the familiar frustration rise in his chest. The silence stretched between them, heavier now for having been briefly challenged. As they prepared to leave the shed, Mang Elias paused beside Kaloy, resting his weathered hand on the great animal's neck. "Not much longer for either of us, old friend," he murmured, thinking Nando couldn't hear. But Nando caught the words, and they sent a chill through him despite the afternoon heat. Not much longer for either of us. What did his father mean? Was? He's sicker than he let on. "Father," Nando began, wanting to ask about the comment, but his father had already moved toward the shed's entrance, effectively ending any possibility of further conversation. That evening, as they walked home together in silence, the distance between them felt wider than ever. Clara served their simple meal without mentioning the awkward moment in the shed, but Nando could see the concern in her eyes. "I don't understand," Nando confided to her later, after the children were asleep. "Why can't he talk to me about Mother Rosa? She gave me life. Don't I have the right to know what kind of person she was?" Clara took his hand in hers. "The pain of loss is different for each person, Nando. Maybe for him, not talking about it is his way of pretending it didn't happen." But Nando shook his head. His father could speak easily enough about Lucia, Ramon's mother. He could smile when he remembered her laughter, her stories, her charm. Why was Rosa different? Why was the mother who had given her life to bring him into the world the one subject that always sent his father into retreat? Outside their hut, Nando could hear the evening sounds that marked the advancing season. The deeper calls of frogs from the flooded paddies, the rustle of rice plants grown tall enough to bend in the wind. Soon, the grain would begin to form. And after that, if the rains came at the right time, harvest season would arrive. But looking at his father's increasingly fragile condition, Nando wondered if Mang Elias would be strong enough to see another harvest through to completion. Later that night, unable to sleep, Nando walked back toward his father's hut. He had no specific purpose, just a restless need to understand the distance that always seemed to open between them whenever he tried to get too close. He approached quietly, not wanting to disturb his father if he was sleeping. But as he drew near, he saw light flickering through the bamboo walls and could hear the soft sounds of movement inside. Through a gap in the wall, Nando glimpsed his father sitting at his small table, bent over some kind of handwork. In his weathered hands was a piece of white cloth stretched in a wooden frame, and he was working with a needle, making careful, precise stitches by lamplight. Embroidery. His father was doing embroidery. Nando stared in stunned amazement. The sight was so unexpected, so at odds with everything he thought he knew about his taciturn father, that he could only stand frozen in disbelief. These were hands that had never known anything but the plow and the harness, yet here they moved with surprising steadiness and precision, creating delicate patterns in thread. The embroidery work spread across the frame showed different sections in varying stages of completion. Some edges yellowed with age, suggesting this work had been going on for months, others crisp and new. This wasn't recent work. His father had been laboring over this creation during the long evenings when the rest of the barrio slept. When had his father learned such skills? Who had taught him? And why was he doing this now, in secret, in the deep hours of the night when the rest of the world slept? The embroidery work seemed even more remarkable given his father's declining strength. During the day, those same hands shook when lifting anything heavier than a cup of water. Yet here, by lamplight, they moved with surprising steadiness and precision, as if this delicate work offered him a kind of strength that heavy labor no longer could. As if sensing he was being watched, Mang Elias suddenly looked up. For a moment, their eyes met through the gap in the wall, father and son locked in a moment of mutual recognition and surprise. Then, without a word, his father carefully folded the cloth and put it away, blowing out the lamp and plunging the hut into darkness. Nando waited, hoping for some explanation, some invitation to enter and ask about what he had witnessed. But no call came. After several minutes of standing in the darkness, listening to the settling sounds of the hut, he made his way back home. As he lay beside Clara in their own simple home, listening to the soft breathing of their children in the next room, Nando's mind churned with questions he knew he could never ask. Nando recalled the nights when his father claimed to be unable to sleep, the mornings when he seemed already dressed despite the early hour. How many evenings had he worked on this mysterious project while the rest of the barrio slept? How many times had those careful excuses about restlessness or early rising been covers for this secret labor? What was his father making in secret? Who had taught him such unexpected skills? And why, in all their years together, had he never known that the hands which guided a plow with such strength could also create something beautiful and intricate with needle and thread? The image of his father bent over his mysterious embroidery work lingered in Nando's mind, another piece of a puzzle he was beginning to realize he might never fully solve. Another glimpse of hidden depths in the man who could speak fondly of one wife while maintaining decades of impenetrable silence about another. Another reminder that even those closest to us can remain strangers, carrying secrets as carefully tended as the fields they work, as hidden as treasure buried deep beneath the earth. Tomorrow they would return to the fields together. Tomorrow Cal would carry them both through another day of labor. Tomorrow the familiar rhythm of planting and tending would continue, unchanged and unchanging. But tonight, surrounded by the night sounds of San Isidro, the chirping of crickets, the distant lowing of carabaos, the gentle whisper of wind through rice stalks, Nando felt the weight of all that remained unspoken between them. The silence that had defined their relationship for 27 years had reasserted itself, heavier now for having been briefly challenged. In the darkness, father and son both lay awake in their separate huts, each carrying questions that could never be asked, mysteries that might never be solved, and the aching knowledge that time was running short for the words that had never found their way into the light.